What if I told you you could calculate down to the dollar exactly how much it's going to cost you if a property goes vacant? Because in commercial property, one of the biggest risks there are is if the tenant leaves, because your whole income goes to zero and you're left holding the mortgage, all the other expenses like the insurance and property management fees associated with holding a commercial property. So if you can gain clarity on exactly how long a property is going to be vacant for, how much rental income you're going to lose and how much it's going to cost you in terms of holding expenses while the property is vacant, you have complete clarity before purchasing the property. And when you purchase the property, you know exactly how much you need to put aside each year, each month, each week for when the property inevitably goes vacant. I'm James Hawthorne and I just enjoy researching commercial property deals. And today I'm going to show you how I learned exactly step by step how to calculate how long a property is going to be vacant for, how to calculate exactly how much rental income you're going to lose, and total expenses it's going to cost you to hold a property while it's vacant. So let's get into it. Let's first start with defining what risk is. So risk is the chance that reality turns out worse than expected. So in commercial property, the kind of expectations we have is that the property is going to fund our lifestyle, which is going to generate passive income. What if this doesn't happen? What are the main factors that will stop the property from generating passive income? So in commercial property, there are two main broad categories that stop a property from generating passive income. It's the lower income, lower rent from the property, or increased expenses. So in terms of lower income, the things like vacant, if there's no tenant, you can't get any income from the property. If the rent gets reduced, your income is going to be lower. That's going to affect the amount of passive income, net income from the property. Now, increased expenses, they're going to be interest rates and holding costs. If interest rates go up, the amount of profit you can generate is going to go down. If holding costs go up, like insurance, property management fees or outgoings, the lower your profit's going to be. So they're the two main factors that can lower your passive income from a property. If we say risk as an investor, it's kind of a broad term. And we kind of think, oh, it's risky, it's dangerous. So what our job is as an investor is to remove the dangerous word for risk and use data to actually define what the risk is. So if we look at vacancy risk, that's the biggest factor that can lower our income in terms of commercial properties. Vacancy risk is the likelihood that a rental property will remain unoccupied, resulting in a loss of rental income. So this is the biggest factor that can actually lower our passive income for commercial property, because if there's no tenant, the majority of your income is going to be completely gone. So we look at a cash flow graph, vacancy can crash cash flow. Because if you've got this property and it's generating an income and it's got also fixed expenses, if the income suddenly disappears, you've still got these fixed expenses to pay. That's why most people are scared of commercial property, because they think, I've got this massive loan and this one tenant, and if the tenant leaves, I've got this huge mortgage that I've still got to pay out of pocket. It's not going to be tenanted, so the tenant can't be paying the mortgage, the tenant can't be paying the outgoings and the insurance. I've got to pay it out of my own pocket. So that's why people think it's risky, because they think of this scenario, which is true. If the tenant leaves, you've got all these expenses that are still going to have to be paid, and the tenant's not paying them, so you've got to pay them. So how do we actually turn this risk into clarity? So that's first. Let's go through a scenario. I found this property in Brisbane, sold for $2 million. It's got a rent of $161,000 a year, and it's leased. It's got two properties, so the bottom floor and the top floor, which is the bottom floor is a restaurant, top floor is an office space. And the average lease is 5 years. And it's got a vacancy rate of the area for retail and office of 6%. So we're going to use these numbers to actually define what the risk is, the vacancy risk for the property. So there's a time vacancy risk. And to actually calculate this vacancy risk, you've got to actually figure out there's 365 days in the year. We're going to times that by the vacancy rate. So 365 times a 6% vacancy rate means each year a property on average is going to be vacant in that area for 22 days. Now, because the property is on a 5-year lease, we're going to average that out over 5 years. So the 22 days a year times 5 days means after the 5-year lease is complete with your tenant, you're going to expect it to be vacant for 110 days. So this brings a bit more clarity in terms of once your lease is finished and the tenant doesn't renew, on average, how long do I expect this property to be vacant for? It's going to be vacant for 110 days based on the current vacancy rate in the area. Now, obviously the vacancy rates can change month to month, year to year, but that's just at the moment. We've done some research and that's how long the property is going to be vacant for. Now let's actually analyze the rental risk. Over those 110 days, what sort of loss of rental income am I going to have from this property? So to calculate this, you use the rent and you times that by the vacancy rate. So the rent was $161,000 a year. We times that by the 6%. That means each year, the loss of rental income is going to be $9,600 a year if the property is vacant. Because it's a 5-year lease, let's assume we're going to times it by 5 years. So that means once the property and the tenants doesn't renew and the property goes vacant for 110 days, that means the loss of rental income is going to be $48,000. So now we've analysed the rental income. What about the loan risk? So we've got that $2 million property. We've got a 30% deposit. So the other 70% is a loan. So that's $1.4 million. We've got an interest rate of 6.5%, which means every year we're paying $91,000 a year in interest. That's just interest only. And now we know that after the 5-year lease, the property is going to be vacant for 110 days. So if we calculate the interest we're going to be paying over those 110 days on the loan, it's going to equal $27,500. So this sort of calculation can gain clarity on how much risk there is in the property. So there is time risk, loss of rental income risk, and the loan risk. So all these can actually help you assess what's the vacancy risk, and they help you define vacancy clarity and certainty. Because we actually know now, based on the 6% vacancy rate, the time risk means 110 days. Once the 5-year lease is complete, if the tenant doesn't renew, we know the property is going to be vacant for about 110 days. Now we know the rental risk. Over those 110 days, our loss of rental income is going to be $48,000. And we know the loan risk. We know that over those 110 days, we're going to have to pay $27,500 in interest. So say we've got the next 5 years to build a buffer. We're going to save $5,000 a year. We're going to put aside, so we know that once the property goes vacant, we've got $27,500 saved up from that 5-year lease over those 5 years as a buffer to pay for the loan when the property is vacant. So doing these sort of calculations, running through a scenario like this, seeing the purchase price, the rent, how long the lease goes for, and the vacancy rate, you can actually calculate, what is the actual amount you're going to have to be paying if the property goes vacant. So this risk profile of the property, you start to gain clarity when you go through these scenarios and realize that, am I willing to hold on to this property if I know that it's going to be vacant at the end of the 5-year lease for 110 days? It's going to cost me $27,000. It doesn't become a risk anymore. It becomes clarity and certainty. You know the numbers. You've defined your risk. You've used data to define it and gain clarity on, are you willing to hold this property for 110 days and pay the $27,000 if it goes vacant? If you are willing to hold it, then it's a good deal. And that's how you calculate vacancy risk like a professional. Now, if you enjoy these sorts of videos and want to see what sort of lifestyle you can actually live through one commercial property deal, go watch this video where I show you how one commercial property completely funds a London lifestyle just through this one deal. And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss out on more commercial property videos.